Hello, this is Sarah, Painted Creator. I hope you're having a nice day wherever you are in the world. I just thought I'd do a little something on this paper. So it's some bar hung satin nardo, which is a really smooth grained paper. Bar hung's quite nice. It's got 100% cotton. It's 300 grams per metre squared, so it's a nice watercolour paper, and it's on a block. And a block means that it's glued together, so I don't need to stick it down anywhere onto a board, so I can work with it as is, and that means I can work right to the edge of it. It's a lovely bright day, but I'm just going to put my light on just to help you see. So I'm going to use my Cadmium watercolour paints today. I love these Cadmium watercolours, they're really good value for money, and they have a nice pigment, they've got a nice colour with them. So grab your brushes and your water and a little bit of kitchen towel, and let's paint together. Okay, so I'm doing this in a portrait mode, and I've just put a horizontal line roughly slightly above halfway. If you do that, you can see it's slightly above halfway, and this is going to be a little island or something, so that's good. And I'm just going to get a little piece of masking tape, and I'm going to mask out, and my scissors, where are they be? And I'm going to mask out a little sun. Of course, you could do this with a little bit of masking fluid and let it dry. If you're worried about the grain of your paper being too much, then use masking fluid, because if you use masking tape on really rough paper, it can bleed underneath, and I'm just giving it a good push on in the hope that it doesn't bleed too much underneath. And I'm grabbing my large medium mop brush, and I'm going to wet that sort of top half of my paper with some, oh, my brush is a bit dirty, I have to give that a clean. Hold on, because I don't want the green in there. Let's try again. Oh, a little bit better. So I'm just wetting that top half of the paper. So this paper's around about 5 inches by 7 inches, and I'm just making sure that it's nice and wet. Always, if you're working on a slope, and I'm working on a slope of around about 15 to 20 degrees here, just make sure that you've let the top have a bit more water than the bottom, because the capillary action will work. And then just let your paper absorb that water for a minute, and just do a bit of a breathe. So I'm starting with a really watery base of yellow ochre around the sun area, and that's going to be my lightest part. And in watercolour we always work light to dark. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of cadmium orange off my palette into that, but still quite watery, mainly water. I'm wanting to blend these colours on my paper. If you're working in a climate that your paper's drying, you can just spritz with a little spritzer bottle, really your best friend. So I'm just going to add a little bit more cadmium and orange, still lots of water. So I'm building up the tone. I'm just going to add some alizarin crimson into there. Still lots of water. Just gradually building the tonal value of and the saturation. So I've washed my brush now, and I'm going to take some water out. I'm just going to add some more alizarin crimson, but without mixing it in, so it's a bit more vibrant. Remember, because we're working wet on wet, this will dry round about 30% lighter. So into that alizarin crimson mix, I'm going to do a touch of ultramarine blue to start making it turn towards purple. Touch more as I'm going towards the top of that page. And a touch more in there. So now is the time that I'm just going to leave it to dry. I'm just taking out some of those white bits, just dropping in a little bit more colour. While it's wet, you can do anything with it. Once it's drying, my advice is that you leave it. And this, for me, is the point where I go and rest. Or if I'm feeling quite up for it, I might leave it for a little bit and then give it a blast on a hairdryer. If you're drying it with a hairdryer, just dry it on a medium heat, and that's so that you don't end up damaging the watercolour. Now, can you see I've got some water that's starting to gather here on the bottom, so I'm just using a thirsty brush, and a thirsty brush is a damp brush. So wet your brush, take most of the water out, and it sort of sucks up any little puddles, a little bit like a straw. And then we're going to let that dry totally, and then I'll come in with a second layer over the top of that, as I'm then going to do the water. But I do want some of this really light transparency to stay. So I'm going to go and have a cup of coffee. So here we are, I'm back. This is dry enough. It's not thoroughly dry, so you can still feel a little bit of movement in the water, but that's fine. One thing to think about as you're thinking of your composition of your paintings, if you're doing something like this that's got a sky and today it's water, but you know, or land, you don't want them to be the same depth and intensity of colour. So today I want this to be the lighter part and the land to come forward, so it will have more depth and density. Sometimes there are cases where you might do it the other way around, that the painting's about the sky, and so the land will be fuzzier and less intensive, and the sky will be more dominant. But for this one, the sky needed to be pale. So I'm going to use the same sort of palette to create some distant hills. Sorry, I've got the window open. So some ultramarine blue, a little less watery, but still quite moving, and some alizarin crimson to make a really sort of bluey purple. And we know that blue is seen as a more distant colour, and so is purple. So in my imaginary world, I'm just dropping down some mountain ranges, and then I'm just going to fill those in with my bluey purple. Oops daisy, trying to not go over that horizon line as much. So this is just going wet on dry, and it's just an imaginary space, so it's whatever's in your head. You can't be wrong. I love things like that. So I'm just going to tap a little bit of more saturation into this hillside and a bit here. Just going to give it a little spritz. I want it to stay damp and moving. And within that, I'm just going to drop a little bit more alizarin crimson into that mix, particularly around this sun area. And then some straight alizarin crimson. So all I've done is create some distant hills. I've just put a lot more water into here, and I'm just going to put a very distant hill that's almost not there onto this side. You may or may not see it. But I know it's there. Okay, so some time to just let that rest and do its thing, and then we can dry it off with a hairdryer. We're drying off. I'm just going to drop a little bit more of a brighter tone around this edge of the sun, so I'm just putting on some clean water into the area. Trying my best not to disturb the mix itself underneath, and I'm just putting some Gambo's yellow and yellow ochre into that mix for a bit of a bloom around the sun. Wash my brush, take most of the water away, and then I can just smooth it into the wash that's there with plenty of water. Okay, and I'm just going to let that dry before taking that masking tape off. Yeah. So here we are, we're dry, and hopefully you can see how that masking tape has just retained the sun. I'm just going to get some clean water just onto that sun's edge, and I'm just going to just around the edge of the sun, using that mix onto my small mop brush, just taking a little bit of the brightness away but still maintaining it on this edge. So I'm going to mix a bit, still now on my small mop brush, I'm mixing a bit of a thicker ultramarine and alizarin crimson mix together, and I'm going to just put on some trees across this edge. So I'm going to mix the second one that's just got a little bit more alizarin crimson in it, just so that we've got a little bit of difference. And different sorts of trees. Getting paler towards the middle. And they are in the distance, so we don't want too much information for them. So I'm just getting my little number 0 rigger brush and I'll put a bit more water into this, so this will make more distant trees, and I'm just going to put some sort of distant pine tree ones in here as well. Remember, they will dry lighter, but you will see them as distant trees. Mixing up using different strengths of colour. And remember, you're just playing it. It's your space. You do what you want in terms of how many trees you paint, what shape they are. It's your fantasy world. It's a space where you can escape. It's a beautiful world. So I'm just going to put a little bit of a layer across the sun. drop in some alizarin crimson. Wash it out, plenty of water. Wash it out with plenty of water. So once again we're at the point where we're going to just pause and let it dry. Okay, I'm moving on to the water area, and I'm thinking about sort of where the sun reflection's going to go. So I'm reckoning somewhere like that as the reflection for the sun. And then I'll just paint some loose reflections here. Okay, so we're going to just spritz this water area. If you want a spritz bottle, just wet it, it's fine. And I'm going back in with my large mop brush and a really watery mix of yellow ochre for around that sun, and I'm going to drop in some cadmium orange. So I want that glow on the water, so I'm using horizontal strokes. And I'm just going to add a little bit of alizarin crimson into there. So the horizontal strokes help it look like water. And then adding some ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson together. A little bit of ultramarine blue, quite a lot of water still, and some alizarin crimson. So I'm going to turn my paper, so I want the water drips to go horizontally, not vertically, and I'm going to use a thirsty brush just to soak up some of these little beads of water, and I'm going to mix a thicker ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson mix. More blue than alizarin crimson, and I'm just on this foreground area because it's dark, the water's darker nearer to us, just darkening some of those strokes. And then a bit thicker even still, ultramarine and alizarin crimson. And then I'm just going to drop some shadows into the water. So I'm going across this page because I'm So we've got the reflections in, and I'm just going to take a small flat brush, I've wet it, and I'm going to squeeze the water out as much as possible. I'm just making sure it's clean. It's still green. Yeah, all right. And then I'm just going to run that thirsty brush. So wash it, squeeze it out between your fingers, and then a few little you don't want loads, but it really does help sort of indicate that we've got water. And I'm going to just run all along this edge here. There we go. So guess what, we're leaving that to dry. There we are, we've got a lovely sort of reflection. We've got a nice water, a nice sort of mirror of that sky in here. I like this granulation. Ultramarine always granulates out. It's beautiful with that, and you could leave it at that. You could make more of this sun. You could have lifted out a bit more of that area using a damp brush. So this is just going in with a damp brush to lift out, and it's up to you. It's never, these little flat brushes are really useful for that sort of stiff lifting out because of the harshness of the bristles. So for me, I'm going to pop on at least one little sort of outcrop of some description. So we're going to start with some yellow ochre and some alizarin crimson to make like an orangey browny colour. And I'm going to just pop on a bit of I don't know, a little bit of an outcrop. Just using my flat brush. A really useful brush for just keeping the marks horizontal. I'm just going to darken that and drop in a little bit of ultramarine, and it'll go into like a browny colour, browny grey, and then it'll just darken some parts. Just take some of the excess water out on my paper towel, and I'm just going to flick up some grasses and pop a bit more yellow ochre in that mix. So more of a yellowy brown. Take some of the excess off on my paper towel. So a little bit of a thicker mix of yellow ochre and some alizarin crimson. Just gradually building it up. Take some of the excess off. And then I'm going to just add a little bit of Paynes grey into the mix. right down at the bottom. And just taking your time to build this sort of little shadowy island up. And they're all the same sort of colours that you've used, so they all harmonise. But you're obviously wanting it to stand out a little bit. So, some paint spray with a touch of yellow ochre in there. Creates sort of a neutral dark. I'm just going to paint a couple of twiggy trees. I'm just using my rigger brush. A bit more of a shadow there. So I'm just adding a little bit more Payne's grey and a little bit of burnt sienna into the mix, just to make it a bit browner. I'm going to paint quite a tall tree. I want it to go just around about here. Roughly around there. So I'm just going to change onto my small mop brush. I'm going to locate it as I like a small mop brush for trees. And then I'll be on with my rigger brush in the end. And you could just do this with your rigger brush, or a fine sort of number 8 round or number 4 round. If you find the round brush is easier, then do use them. I'm just mixing in a couple of different hues so that we've got some more distant leaves and some darker ones. And just keep your brush moving. Nobody's seen this tree, so it's fine. It can be your tree. It can be whatever tree suits. And then I'm going back in with my little mop brush. My little rigger brush. It's a 0 rigger, and I'm just going to put some little branch ends on some of these trees. Okay, and maybe a few more little. So we just need to make that tree sit into that landscape. So I'm going for a thicker alizarin crimson and cadmium orange mix, so it's brighter. Just my mop brush. It just helps the trees to sit in that space. Picking up a little bit on the little. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry and see how that goes. So naturally we've got a shadow on this area, so I'm just wetting up what's on my rigger brush, and I'm going to just take that all the way off the paper in a nice wobbly line. And then I'm just going to do some wobbly lines for a little bit of foliage that's on. And then the same for these little twiggy bits. So and then just like we did here, we're just going to take the flat brush and I'm going to just put that water back through reflection. I'm going to run one through down here as well. And then maybe one here. Just enough to ensure that we see it as a reflection and not as a tree. So I also need to just drop a little bit of this orange in as a reflection. Coming back with just a little bit of water. It just softens it off a little bit, and we've got a nice sort of focal point. I like this part, and I'm running out of energy, so that's probably going to be it for me today. So I'm just getting my little rigger brush and a little bit of Paynes grey into, and we'll just put a bird in the sky or two. I've got a blob there, I'll have to have a bird on it. So I hope you've enjoyed that. Hope you give it a go, and if you've enjoyed it, please like and subscribe and share the channel with your friends if they think they'll appreciate it. And happy painting is where I'm at.